Here, distilling mentioned a lot because distilleries is sort of the active word, but the equal or even maybe more important step is having a really, really effective activated carbon filtration system.
So the filtration and what was the first thing?
The distilling, the still itself.
So the filtration and the distilling.
Those are the two things that you have to do. You have to do both of them. And at the end of the day, filtration is possibly more important than how you distill, as long as you're not distilling terribly. So when you're making vodka in the US, the rules are you can make it from anything you want, and to include bags of white sugar, tomato waste, milk waste, anything that's got a source of sugar you can ferment, you can turn into vodka.
Wow.
In Russia, you can't make vodka unless you make it from potatoes, grain, or sugar beets. Any other source material creates not vodka, something else. And you can't sell it as vodka. And the other things are you have to distill it to at least 190 proof in the US. And then you have to treat it with activated carbon, but it doesn't say anything about how. This is a taster-sized version of one of our signature cocktails that we serve here. We designed the cocktail in-house. It's called an Alpenglow because the color kind of resembles the sunset orangish pink. It's made by infusing our vodka with a little bit of vanilla bean and lime zest. And then we mix that with ruby red grapefruit juice, a little bit of lemon juice, and a little bit of sugar.
That's good.
How much vodka is in here?
Very little.
Very little? Because I could taste it. I could taste the vodka.
Yeah, proportionally, it's probably maybe 1/4 vodka.
So why is it so much better in the vodka belt?
Oh, they have vodkas of all qualities in the vodka belt, from really, really nasty, cheap stuff, all the way through really good stuff.
So what makes the really good stuff better?
Mostly it's going to be the activated carbon filtration. All of their processes are very careful.
So isn't that like a Brita filter's activated carbon filter?
Similar, yeah. That is an activated carbon filter, but the kind of filtration you're doing when you're making vodka, we use a 10-foot pipe that's 5-inch diameter, completely full of very small particles of activated carbon. And you have to treat the carbon just right to get it to be effective, to work well. And as you wash the vodka through, it removes impurities or the organic chemicals that are byproducts from the fermentation process will tend to stick to the carbon, and the alcohol in the water will come through cleaner. That's the back of the envelope description of it, and it's pretty accurate. If you pump it through very slowly, very gently, and there is more water than alcohol, you have to dilute it down below 100 proof, then you do get a preference that organic chemicals will tend to stick to the carbon, and you get a purer product out. And it's noticeably smoother every time we put it through the carbon when we do ours.
So how many times do you put it through the carbon?
When we're making our crystal vodka, it goes through 2 times. When we're making our brilliant vodka, it goes through 5 times. So each time it goes through, it takes a full day. We pump it through at less than a gallon a minute. We're working with somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 to 350 gallons. So we just sort of slowly let it pump through from one tank into a clean other tank. And when we're done, we backflush that carbon with boiling water to drive off all those organic chemicals they're not bonded, but they're just attracted. They're easy to drive off with high temperature water. We flush it till it's clean again, and then we cool it off, and the next day we pump the vodka through all day again.
So compared to like, let's just say like a Grey Goose, how many times would that be
Distilled?
is filtered?
I couldn't say.
Okay.
Honestly, I don't know, and different equipment is going to operate differently. So if you look at Absolute, they've got an online tour you can do of an Absolute distillery, and they have huge columns that they're pumping their vodka through with activated carbon. But you can't really see how they've got them set up. I mean, it's just a big steel pipe when you look at it. So.
Right.
Is that what we're looking at here?
That's the distillation column. The activated carbon column is that pipe on the back wall over there. I've got it unloaded right now. We've taken the carbon out. We're reprocessing the carbon. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So it's 10 feet tall and it's 5 inches diameter.
So what are we seeing drip out?
This is what we call the Hearts Run. The Hearts, we're distilling our vodka for the first time.
So that's vodka.
Yeah,
now.
so let me go through the process from the beginning so you can kind of see how we do this. We do everything here in-house by hand. We start with grain, Alaskan grain. It comes as a dry.
Why did you want to use Alaskan grain? You said that was important to you.
It was important to me because Alaska's had this ridiculous agriculture project going on for decades. And if you go down near Delta Junction or down near Palmer, there's a lot of land set aside for agriculture and a lot of farms being run. And the idea was that they would be exporting Alaskan grain. And there's a huge grain silo down in Valdez for loading ships, which has never been used because there's no economic way you're ever going to grow grain in Alaska and export it to anywhere, because anywhere else you go is easier to grow grain there. So it's been a failed project as an export project, but they are growing a lot of grain. So I felt it would be a kind of a cool way to take an Alaskan product that doesn't really go anywhere, but we're exporting Alaskan barley as in the form of bottles of vodka now. So this is the grain we buy. Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
I'll take your glass. I got it.
Oh.
And we mill it when we get it, and we crush it down like that. So that tan guy there with the wooden box on top is our grain mill. So when we're buying grain, we'll buy 4,000 pounds at a time. And we run our vodka in batches. So a batch starts out as 4,000 pounds of dry grain in these big canvas super sacks.
Does this smell like anything?
It smells like barley, not much. It's a little warm in here. With the still running, basically that big heater up there doesn't go all winter long until it gets to like minus 30 or 40. We keep this place heated just with our waste heat.
Oh,
Makes
yeah.
sense.
These are two different?
They're the same, but one has been crushed in our grain
Oh,
mill.
this is crushed?
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
When you say waste heat, what kind of waste are you talking about?
I'm just saying the still is hot
Oh, the
and it
ambient
sheds
heat.
lots of heat.
Got it.
And we have it running a lot.
I thought you had some like biofuel thing going.
No, we don't.
That's why it's so hot.
So we'll get in 4,000 pounds of grain, we'll grind it up, and we'll take 1,000 pounds at a time and put it in this tank over here. It's Valentina. And it has a big mixing motor on it. It's heat jacketed, steam jacketed. So we'll put 500, 400 gallons of water in there, heat it up, add the grain, and cook it just like making oatmeal. Just make a porridge. And then we add a bunch of acid. We need to get the pH down to around 4 for the yeast to run at optimal efficiency. We'll cook it till the starch is very hydrolyzed. So the sugar that's in grain is mostly in the form of starch. And starch is just regular sugar molecules, but they're stuck end-to-end in long chains. And they're very inefficient to turn into alcohol directly, but if you can break them up into single sugars, then they're easy to convert into alcohol. So we want to cook the grain until we've got all the starch dissolved in water. Then we add enzymes as we're cooling it that break up the starch into individual sugars. And the whole thing goes from being a thick vat of basically like oatmeal to a big vat of sugar water. And it takes, well, the cooling is fairly slow, but the enzymes are very fast. The enzymes, in 10 minutes, it goes from very, very thick to just non-viscous liquid water. So we cook it and digest it until we've got a big tank of sweet mash. Then we sieve out all the grain solids, which is literally hundreds of pounds of grain solids from each 1,000 pounds of grain. They're damp, but they're very highly nutritious animal feed. They've got high protein. They've got most of the nutrients of the grain. They're missing the carbohydrates. But as far as the nutritional value, it's pretty good quality. So we give that away to local livestock farmers. It's a waste stream for us if we have to dispose of it. But they can take it and feed it to cows and pigs and chickens. And to them, it saves them a bunch of money. So it works really well for us. Most of the farmers we're dealing with are people who have like kids in 4-H and that sort of thing. So it's fun,
Drunken cows.
helps everybody.
Chunky cow.
This is before it's turned into alcohol, so they don't get drunk.
They don't get the fun part.
No,
Fun part.
but they do like getting drunk. The people that, because you can separate it afterwards too, and some distilleries do, and that's also very successful. But we don't do that. Anyhow, once we've sieved out the solids, the liquid goes in one of these big fermenting tanks here. These are big open top square fermenters.
How do you put the names?
Oh, all of my equipment has Russian girls' names. I just wrote down a bunch of them. I said the tanks are going to be Veronica, and this is Irina, Nadia. My wife is from Russia. We didn't use any family names. So there's no Natalia, which is my wife's name. There's no Olga, there's no Zarina. Those are my sister-in-law and mother-in-law.
What's this thing?
That's a little test still that we do project work on. I've been testing out different methods for digesting the grain to see if we could up our sugar recovery. And when we're testing it, we do the mash and then we distill out the alcohol and see how much we get for 10 pounds of grain.
How long does that take, that whole process?
It depends on how long you let it ferment for, but it's probably a couple hours worth of work in the morning to do the mashing, and then the still, once you start the still, is going to run a long day driving the alcohol out. It's pretty slow.
So you don't want nothing to test right
No, this is the sort of thing that if it was running, I'd happily show it to you, but it's not at the moment.
Do you distribute only in Alaska or?
And to Rancho Santa Margarita,
Oh, wow, okay.
and they can distribute to anywhere in California, I think, but I'm not sure. They're aiming for high-end small distilleries selling to high-end bars and liquor stores and things like that,
Okay.
which is sort of our target market.
Yeah, it's just like that beer in Kansas City. That, there's a certain beer in Kansas City that you could only get it in Kansas City or in
Oh, I bet there's a bunch of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. But every state has its own liquor laws, so shipping from one state to another can be as complicated as you can imagine, or it can be very simple. It just depends on the states.
Yeah.
So I used to have a liquor license in Washington State just so I could ship stuff through Seattle back to Alaska to get it to Juneau, Sitka, and the Panhandle area. And I let that license lapse because there's easier ways to get stuff there than that. And that license cost $300 a year and wasn't doing me any good.
So,
But in California, I just have to tell them I'm selling to this particular distributor, and then they don't care.
so because there's no sales tax in Alaska and there is in California, how did you come up with California? Because there's sales tax in California.
Well, that distributor approached me and wanted to carry our stuff.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and I felt they were a good fit, so I went with them.
And they distribute for all California for you?
I don't know if they're, not yet. They're very new. But I believe they intend to go as far north as the Bay Area anyhow. And I think they also own the company Asombroso Tequila. And I think they have an outlet in Napa, in the Napa area.
So if we ever wanted to get this vodka, we have to go to some.
No, you don't. You can order it actually online from Great American Craft Spirits, gacraftspirits.com.
Oh, okay.
Or you can just buy it here and take it home.
And is there a sales tax on your website when you
If
order
you buy
your
it from them, there will be sales tax, I think. And then, of course, there's also shipping.
Yeah.
So the price is a bit higher than ours. And their price is better if you buy more bottles at one time. Single bottle sales have a pretty high shipping rate at this moment. Anyhow, so once we've got the mash in there, we cool it off, then we take some of it in a bucket, we start some yeast up, get the yeast getting really active, and we combine it and we let the yeast go to town. And it takes about 4 days to turn what should be about 600 pounds of sugar into alcohol. At day 3, the yeast is pretty much starting to die off, and day 4, it's pretty inert. So that goes quite quickly if you can keep the tank cool. We put fans out here blowing on them, and that keeps them down at a temperature where the yeast is really active. And so we'll start another fermenter. We'll start 4, each with 1,000 pounds of the 4,000 pounds of grain we started with. We'll start them every other day. And on the 4th day, when the first fermenter is ready, we'll start stripping the moonshine out. So what happens is we'll pump from the fermenter into the still, and we'll set a much smaller version of the column on top of the still, and we'll very quickly do what we call stripping, which is, it's sort of a crude process where you take the mash and you just remove the alcohol, but you get a lot of other organic chemicals from the fermentation besides. So you end up with moonshine. Right? You can definitely smell the grain in the yeast.
Oh, yeah. Ooh.
It's fairly high proof.
Wow.
Moonshine's not really a pleasant material. I don't think people should drink moonshine. There's a lot of distilleries that are selling moonshine now.
That smells good.
You want
It's
some? Take a
not
swig.
actually-
Take a swig.
If you're into making whiskey, this actually isn't bad.
Yeah.
But for drinking purposes, it's pretty foul.
You're into whiskey?
If you're into whiskey. If you're making whiskey, then you make a moonshine like this, which is fairly foul, and then you put that into wooden casks. And the wooden casks are specially burned on the inside. They're made out of American white oak. So they burn the insides with a propane torch really heavily. Then they blast them with high pressure, very high temperature steam. And this fractures the surfaces inside, so it gives you a huge surface area, which is the same or almost identical activated carbon that we're using over there. But when you put it in a burned cask, these contaminants you want to remove will stick to the cask, carbon inside, but also flavors and color from the burned oak will then also infuse the whiskey. So as it matures, the harsh chemicals that you want to remove will self-remove into the cask, and the whiskey flavor will kind of round out based on the charred inner material leaching into the spirit. So making whiskey, you make a moonshine, which is a fairly quick process, and then you set it aside for potentially years and years and years. And if you open a whiskey at 8 years and it doesn't taste good, you let it sit for 10. Just wait until it's good, because you don't want to sell lousy whiskey. And eventually, unless you've done something really wrong, it should come out good. But I'm a vodka maker. My background is not in making whiskey. And whiskey has a lot of sort of knowledge that you have to have as far as how to pick casks correctly, how much char you order, and how you do a lot of the steps of the process will affect the final flavor. And I don't have an intuitive feel for how to do that. But as a chemist, I'm really good at distilling and filtering, or as I call it, trapping and polishing. And so this vodka is it's a northern tradition to make vodka, so I felt it was a good match for Alaska, but also the process of making vodka plays to my strengths. So vodka was a natural decision for me. So anyhow, when we're stripping, we just have this guy full of ash, this is Valeria, and a little column, a condenser, and we're just pulling off the moonshine as quick as we can into one of these tanks. Like this one. Yeah, it doesn't smell very good.
What does it smell like, Glenn?
It smells like after a party and you're cleaning up the next day.
Yeah, squeezing out the mop after mopping up after a party.
I smelled that before,
Yeah.
many times.
It smells like the mat.
To get out of the mat.
Anyhow, as we're doing we'll strip all 4 fermenters, get all the moonshine together in one tank. It'll be about 3/4 full at about 150 proof. Then we'll clean out the still real well, and we put the moonshine back in. We add a bunch of water for technical reasons. It really helps with the purification process if you have a lot of excess water in the still. And we take off the little column and we route the vapors up through that big column there. So that big column is 10 feet long, and it's 8 inches diameter, and it's completely full of this material. These are, I don't have a good name for them, but they're commercial column packing material. They're made from surgical stainless steel, and they have 2 sort of simple properties, but what they really do is take up space and add surface area. So they've got lots of holes, so they never block vapors from flowing up. You never want to build up back pressure on your still, because they explode when you do that. But liquid dripping down, and this is the really critical thing, liquid dripping down comes down quite slowly because there's all the surface area, so it has to trickle through all this matrix of material. And so you have...
So this is the trick to the still?
I'm sorry?
This is the trick to your distilling right here?
This is, I wouldn't call it the trick, but this is what makes this a very high efficiency still. It's a refluxing still, and it's called a fractionating still. and it's a packed column refluxing still. The packed column is really important. The efficiency. You see a lot of stills that have columns like that have little portholes up the side. If you go to a number of distilleries, you've undoubtedly seen these. And in those ones, there's a plate at each level, at each porthole, with little bubble caps. And they work the exact same way as this in theory, but they're fantastically less efficient. You can pull the... actually, let me grab a couple chairs for you. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I don't mind.
We got this whole pipe full of these things. And at the top, there's a condenser. You can see the red and blue hoses going in up there. So that unit is cold. It's got little holes. Vapors can pass through it, but since it's cold, they encounter it, liquefy, and drip back down. So when we start up the still, we have the cold water going through the condenser at maximum, and all of the material that's boiling is going up, is liquefying and dripping back down. And so the
You also don't create a vacuum when you do that. You keep it open.
well, it's open all the way through, so it can backflow air if it has to.
And you keep the liquid from spilling over by keeping it cold enough to keep the liquid condensing.
Right. If it's not cool enough, vapor will pass through the condenser and come down this copper right here, this non-diluted one that it's coming down now.
Right.
So what happens is the vapors, when you start up, you heat it gently, and vapors will go through those copper pipes and up to the column. They'll heat up the column, and then start dripping down from the top. And so everything that goes to the top drips down. As it's coming down, it's encountering hot vapor that's continuing to go up, which is always going up. And the chemicals that boil or evaporate at the lower temperatures will re-evaporate without ever getting to the bottom of the column. And as they turn back into vapor, then they start going up with the other vapor.
Right.
And so they become trapped there. They go up, come down halfway, evaporate, and go up. So, and this is, as I said, these are the low boiling point compounds like methanol and acetone.
And then, so you want those out, and you're trying to
We're,
remove those.
yeah, we absolutely want to get those out. They're critical.
And they stay in this like infinite loop until.
So you keep simmering, and the more you send up there, the more it gets trapped in the column. And the idea is you reflux for long enough that you've got the vast majority of it in a column. Then you reduce the cooling at the top so that some of the vapor starts to escape. The lightest chemicals escape first. And you see the white hoses that go into that piece of copper up there? That's another condenser. That just cools it so that it comes out as a liquid instead of a vapor. Because you don't want hot alcohol vapors building up in here.
So that's all the bad stuff.
No, this is actually good stuff.
That's the good stuff. That's
But the
coming out.
first stuff that comes out is the bad stuff. And we'll collect a couple gallons of what we call the heads, which is this. You can move chairs.
So far away. Okay.
This is the heads. It smells like acetone. It's pretty foul.
I was gonna say it's got to be pretty friggin' strong.
Yeah, it does sound. It almost smells like nail polish remover almost.
Exactly. That's what acetone is.
Oh, yeah.
So this is the first stuff that comes out of the still, and we want to remove this completely. We don't want any of this in our vodka. Because acetone smells bad. The other things that are in here, some of them smell bad, some of them don't smell at all.
Does
some
that
of them
have the
smell
same
fine.
properties as like a nail polish remover?
Oh yeah.
Oh, wow.
What do you do with all that?
There's a jug around here somewhere. We give it to one of the local marijuana outfits.
Oh yeah.
There's a place right across the street, and they take marijuana plants and they extract the active ingredients from the plants, and then they make edibles.
Yeah.
And so they end up with their extraction film. It's all waxy. It's got kind of gummy residue on it.
And they use the
this
acetone to
for
clean
a
it?
stripping agent to clean it. For the first step.
I love it.
Do you ever give any to your wife to use as nail polish remover?
If she wanted it, I would. But I don't think she would use it. If she shows up, you'll get to meet her. You'll see. She's a big city girl. She's not likely to put some weird thing on her fingers. She's from Moscow, Russia, which is a city of 17 million people.
Wow.
And so this is, well, Fairbanks is, you probably noticed, not the world's most beautiful city. It's tiny and it's remote. And to her, I mean, in Russia, they talk about people that live in Siberia as people that live in the sticks. But at least they're not in Alaska.
Wow.
It's just, my daughter, my stepdaughter, her daughter, is a petroleum engineer, and she's actually working in Siberia right now. She's in Irkutsk, and she moved there, and she was complaining. Irkutsk is a town of 500,000 people, and it's 500 years old.
Oh, wow.
And it's beautiful. It's on the shore of Lake Baikal, which is the biggest freshwater body in the world. And it's like, what are you complaining about?
Right.
But she's lonely. She didn't have any friends there. She's gone. Anyhow, there's obviously some Russian influence in the way we make vodka.
Yeah.
Our top end vodka, our brilliant vodka in the gold label, my specific goal when making that was that I wanted to impress my father-in-law. And he's passed away now, but he's living in Moscow, and like Muscovites, they drink vodka neat, and he gave me just fantastic bottles of vodka. I've got a whole sort of collection of Russian vodkas upstairs. And they're great. They're so smooth and so nice drinking. They're just amazing.
So you know how like whiskey and bourbon and all that stuff, it's better, gets better with age?
It gets better with age in the barrel.
In
Once
the
it's
barrel.
bottled, it doesn't help it at all anymore.
Is that the same deal for vodka?
Nope.
No?
Aging is not a part of making vodka.
Okay, that's it.
It's all about the
It's all about the technical process by which you're purifying and then the ingredients you use.
But the shelf life is, like, how long is the shelf life of vodka?
Indefinite. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And the same with whiskey. You don't want to keep any colored liquor in bright sunlight that gets attacked by the UV radiation. But whiskey basically stays good forever once it's in glass.
This is your
As
background
vodka.
in chemical engineering?
Well, it was chemistry with emphasis on biochemistry.
Oh, okay.
But I graduated from college in '92, and I worked as an analytical chemist for the last 35 years or whatever it is. So, and I still do. I work week on, week off for the pipeline, testing oil.
Oh, we were going to check that out next.
Oh yeah, we'll see it. It's a big, long pipeline.
Yeah. Well,
Big long pipe.
Close.
Yeah, I mean, you'll drive within a couple miles of it no matter what you do if you get anywhere near the north side of town, so you might as well stop and see it.
Right.
And there's a visitor center just north of town near Fox.
Right. And what got you starting this business doing besides?
Well, I was
kinda-
really interested in the idea of doing it. I was sat in a seminar about Alaska's economy when I was in college, just for fun, and it was an interesting talk, but the big takeaway lesson for me there was Alaska's economy is based almost entirely on exporting raw natural resources, oil, timber, fish. They're just caught and shipped out, processed, and then we buy them back. And we're not getting the value-added value of our resources. They go out to Seattle. I mean, almost any fish you're going to get in any restaurant in Alaska, unless they're really, really taking pains to work with local fishermen, that all comes from Seattle.
Really?
Even if it's Alaska king crab, that stuff all goes down to Seattle and comes back.
Really?
Virtually all, yeah.
Wow.
So here coming up soon, the Copper River Reds will start running. This is sort of the first big salmon run of the year, and they're considered the best. I mean, it's like the best salmon you can get. And there will be guys on the river catching commercially as fast as they can, and the first boxes they fill up go right onto little planes, and they fly them straight to restaurants here, Anchorage, but most of it goes to Seattle, and you'll see it advertised that way. You know, this year's Copper River Reds are coming in, and
It's not salmon season yet.
no, it's not. It won't be until mid-May, probably, I think.
What season is it right now?
I don't know. There's probably ocean fishing, so there's probably, and I'm not an expert, so I may say something totally stupid, but I think they do a lot of crabbing in the winter and halibut, and they're always fishing tons of pollock, but nobody eats pollock as pollock. Pollock is what's turned into fake fish patties, and like fake crab and that sort of
Oh,
thing.
yeah.
It's I think the biggest fishery in the world, but it all just gets ground up into mush and then reconstituted into other products.
Sounds lovely.
Yeah, it's not very lovely. And they catch a lot of cod, and I don't know what everything they do. And you see, I live in Fairbanks. We're a long way from the coast.
So how many vodka distilleries are there in Fairbanks? Just you?
Well, there's 4 distilleries in Fairbanks, and I think all of them make vodkas.
Oh,
But most of them, there's my wife. Hooray! Two of them also make other products and specialize in other products. One of them makes gin and rum and akavit as well. One of them is primarily a whiskey distillery. And there's one downtown that I think is mostly vodka as well, and they use Alaskan potatoes.
Alaskan potato.
And that's what I'm told. I specifically didn't go into potatoes. I chose grain because the grain industry was kind of such a joke. I felt like someone should be using grain for something good. I mean, all the grain that's grown here gets used. It's used for animal feed and that sort of thing. But it seemed like a good use for it. Whereas the potatoes are actually quite in demand because we have the potatoes grown in Alaska are virus-free. I don't know, some kind of potato blight with scabs on potatoes. We don't have that here. So most of the potatoes that are grown here are sent out as seed potatoes to places that have potato blight problems. And so the potatoes are actually a valuable commodity that have come to be. So I felt the grain was sort of the orphan product. It needed a boost.
Can you taste the difference between a potato vodka and a
Yeah,
grain vodka? You can?
absolutely.
What is
However, there's a caveat to that because a big difference between any two vodkas is going to be how they're made. So if you take so-and-so's potato vodka and so-and-so's grain vodka, they may taste very different, but the difference might be mostly that this guy's got really different equipment and he's not doing any activated carbon filtration and this guy is, or something like that. So if you go to a company like Chopin, who makes pretty good vodka, and you buy their potato vodka and their wheat vodka and you taste the two, they're very different. And then you can see that this is the same product made from two different materials. And their potato vodka is really smooth. Chopin potato vodka is a vodka that I would look for in American liquor stores because it's good.
So, because they're potato vodkas, do they need like different equipment, or is it pretty much the same type of
I'm not an
equipment?
expert on making potato vodkas.
Oh.
I think usually when you're making potato vodka, you start with dried potato flakes. And you'd still cook it. You wouldn't have to have a grain mill, but if you're starting with just like raw potatoes, you'd have to peel them and smash them somehow.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm not qualified to answer that.
Oh,
But
okay.
most of the equipment is basically very similar.
Okay.
Only the early processing parts would be different. Once you get them into the mashing tank, you're cooking them down and digesting the starch to turn it into simple sugars. It's all going to be very similar from there on. Anyhow, so once we're distilling, we'll take off the heads, and we'll get about a gallon or two of heads at the beginning, and then we start having really clean, nice liquor coming out. And then we'll set the heads aside in a jug, and that's going to go to our marijuana buddies. And since my day job is working for the pipeline, we legalize marijuana, but I can't try it.
Right.
Because the pipeline is a zero tolerance workplace, and you can't have any residue in your system or they'll fire you and you will never work with them again.
Oh yeah.
But I call them our buddies. They're funny guys. The first day we opened, during our grand opening, they came in and asked what we were doing with our heads. And they were baked out of their skulls, absolutely high as a kite. Hey, what are you doing with your heads? It's like, man, if you want them, we'll absolutely give them to you. But sometimes I give them to my brother, and he uses them in the stove and that sort of thing. They're useful for things. You don't want to dispose of them if you can avoid turning them into waste. If you have to take them and dispose of them, they potentially can be hazardous waste. If the methanol and the acetone is too high, and if you have hazardous waste, you have a nightmare because it's expensive and it's got a lot of record keeping involved with handling it. And you have to hold on to the records for like 30 years. So recycling is the way to go with anything that might be hazardous waste, and that's what we do. Anyhow, so once we're done collecting heads, the hearts start collecting in this tank, and that's what we're doing right now. And this tank smells wonderful. I love this smell. So that is 190 proof.
Wow! Whoa!
And
Whoa!
What's 190 proof?
Oh, smell that.
Christine.
Oh, ouch. Wow.
Wait.
And so this is nowhere near finished vodka, but it already smells
Wait, before
really
you
good.
go in,
Yeah.
I want to catch your reaction.
Wow.
Woo.
Wait.
So good.
Okay, go ahead.
So good. Might want to go swimming in there.
You don't like to leave the spirits at that high of a proof for that long because it's super flammable like that.
Right. So that's 190 proof in there.
Yeah, it's about 181,
Wow.
which is very, very close to the theoretical maximum you can get by distilling. Distilling, the proof of this is complicated, but getting past 192 simply cannot be done by distillations. You know, a small amount of water will always come through. And if you use other chemical processes, you can get alcohol to literally 100% alcohol. But as soon as you open a jar of that, it sucks moisture out of the air so fast that it goes down to 192 almost immediately. So there's not a lot of use for that. I mean, that's a pretty exotic product. It's used in biochemistry sometimes when you're handling DNA or processing proteins. And you open a little thing and you use it real quick, and then you close it again and you keep it in a desiccator and hope for the best. And there's all kinds of stories about grad students drinking it. And you don't drink that. Really toxic. Anyhow, so we'll collect hearts for a few days until this tank will be about here full. So, but as you recall, it's 190 proof. So when we dilute that with water to vodka strength, it's going to be full. Or we might have more than a tank's worth of vodka in there. We got a lot. So we collect the hearts, and eventually the level of alcohol in here has boiled down, and heavier chemicals start coming through this column and getting past it and coming out. And you get the flavor starts to go off. And we're just about getting to that point now. And so the flavor doesn't turn bad right away, it just kind of turns funny at first. But you don't want that in your vodka if you're making top-end vodka. So when the flavor starts to go off, and believe me, we're tasting this all the time, it takes...
You taste that?
Yeah, you have to. So I just get a little bit on my finger, and put it on my tongue. It burns, but you get used to it. But you can tell the flavor if this is quality vodka or not, very accurately by taste. Just a little taste like that with experience. The first time I did it, it just burned. That's all. But you develop a taste for it. Anyhow, so when the flavor goes off enough, I'll move this tank out of the way and I'll push this one over and I'll start collecting the tails. And the tails is like the last 20% of the alcohol that's in here. It doesn't taste great, but it's got a bunch of alcohol and it's easy to recycle. If I take the tails, if I collect enough tails so that the tails tank is about half full or 3/4 full, I can put it back in the still, add a bunch of water, and distill it, and get most of that alcohol back out as hearts. It's good stuff.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
To the same alcohol content as the...
Yep. Yeah. No, it's good. It's good, high quality. Well, what I normally do is I collect the tails in here, and then when we're stripping the Moonshine, we'll just put that into the tails tank with the tails from the previous batch, and rerun it that way. So we'll distill it, then we'll take the hearts and we dilute it with water to less than 50% alcohol. We try and get it to around 93 proof, something like that.
Okay.
So 100 proof is 50% alcohol in the U.S.
Wow.
In England, it's different.
Wow.
50% alcohol is, I can't remember, 100 proof is like 57% alcohol in England or something like that. I can't remember exactly how it works, but it's weird. And the traditional test was if you mixed 100 proof or higher liquor with gunpowder at a certain ratio, and lit it, if it was 100 proof on the English system, the gunpowder would burn, the whole thing would burn. And if it didn't have enough alcohol content, then it would just kind of fizzle. So that was how you tested your proof.
Got it.
MacGyver would know that.
But in the US, we just made it simple. Anyhow, we'll dilute it down to less than 100 proof. So this tank will be mostly full. I'll put in a bunch of water. And we use ultra-purified water for any time we're adding water to our vodka batch. We have a commercial reverse osmosis system that really, really purifies water, and it'll do 300 gallons a day. So we have a tank back there in the corner. We just keep full of ultra pure water. And when we need something, we just let it run for a day and fill it up again. But then we take it over there with a clean tank and we start passing it through the activated carbon. And we pump it through from the bottom very, very slowly. It goes up. It takes 10 minutes for the solvent front, the alcohol to get from the bottom to the top, and really slow. And as I said, it takes about 7 hours to process an entire tank. And at the end of that time, then we flush through with a little extra water to push it all out. Then we back flush it, top down, boiling water to drive out all the contamination. And we cool it off with cold water, and the next day we do it again. And we flush through, we spend 2 full days processing our crystal vodka, and we spend 5 full days, 3 more days when we're doing our brilliant vodka. And then we distill one final time. So we'll process it till it's really, really smooth, and we're sort of changing up the way we do these steps, but traditionally we bring it back here and we run it through the still one last time. You always take off a little more heads and a little more tails every time you do it. Those aren't perfect processes, so there's always a little bit left. And the hearts are better, but then we have to prove by testing with lab equipment that it's at least 190 proof so that it's legally vodka. And that information is also useful because I have to calculate exactly how much water to add to get to exactly 80.0 proof. Because when you're bottling it, the vodka needs to be the strength it says on the label or you can get into real trouble. It's a tax issue.
So you can't go higher or lower.
No, you have to be within 0.1 proof. So 79.9 to 80.1.
Whoa.
It's not very difficult to get there if you've got a very accurate hydrometer. But the dilution, the formulas for calculating exactly how much water to add, we do it by the pound, and they work very well. I always go for 80.5 proof, let it sit, test it, and then add a little more water to get it to 80.0. Because if you overshoot, you have to redistill again, and that takes a few days. It's tedious. Anyhow, so once we've got it diluted to exactly 80, we let it settle. Test it to make sure it's 80, record that all down so that if the feds want to come audit it, they can. And then we start bottling. We do all our own bottling here as well. All of these cases you see wrapped in plastic on the tops of the shelves, those are all empty cases of vodka bottles. So when I was ordering bottles, there's all these American bottle companies. So you start a company that's a distillery, and you get hit within like 2 days by people trying to sell you labels, and sell you bottles, and sell you corks, and sell you grain, and chemicals, and distilling equipment. They're like sharks. They're watching for people to register businesses, and then they just start mailing you stuff. So there's all these American bottle companies, and they'll make you fancy, really nice bottles of any kind you want. But it turns out there aren't any or hardly any actual American bottle factories. So what they do is they take your order, they sub it out to a factory in China or Mexico, and then they mark it up 3 times when it comes in, and you pay way more than you probably should. So I was at a distilling conference and I heard that there was a Chinese bottle factory delegation at the conference, and they weren't registered, they didn't have a booth, but they were wandering around, and I just looked around till I found them. That was my highest priority once I knew they were there. And it was a job because I don't speak any Chinese, but it took about a year. We had a custom bottle made, which I can show you when we get over to the tasting table. And we got it for about a third of what it would have cost if I'd gone to an American company. So that turned out to be great, really. Like I said, it took a lot of my time just trying to make sure we were communicating correctly and learning how to do international purchasing and that sort of thing, because that's not something I had any background in.
Right.
But once I figured out all the ins and outs and how to make sure that if I gave them a check, my bottles would actually show up, which there's systems in place for all that. I just had to learn how to do it and how to insure and get myself put on a ship and carried across the ocean. And it took, like I said, a year, but it was worth it.
Right.
What size are the